everybody and welcome to my channel. I am Moody, and in this video we're going to be sculpting Michelangelo from the 2014 Ninja Turtles movie. So I'll let these images play through and I'll jump in when the sculpting starts. Okay, so first thing we're going to do in this one is just get the body sort of like to the correct proportions. So we're just going to go through the base mesh that I made for myself, and we're going to start like pumping him up a little bit using this Super Saiyan anatomy guide. So it works out pretty well. He ends up looking quite stonky, and the turtles from the 2014 movie they're pretty chonky. They're big boys. So yeah, we'll let this go through because it's just posing and prepping the model. Sorry, not posing, it's just prepping the model. And we'll move on to his head here. Again, this looks weird for a minute. I'd come back to this, so we're just trying to get size and proportions and sort of like everything in position, so we know that we're working to a sort of proportionately correct size sort of turtle. So yeah, we'll let this go for a little bit longer, and I'll jump back in when we start doing actually likeness sculpting on his face. So we're just going to finish up a little bit more on the body here, prepping it a little bit more and just getting a few more of the shapes in that we need. I think we bring, yeah, here's his shell. We're bringing his shell in now. Again, we're going to come back across the face in a little while once the body's a bit closer to the actual proportions and everything's in that we need for to get the sculpt started for the base. Yeah, like I said, he looks a bit weird at the moment, but like we'll move back to his face in a little while. So I think we're going to go through the body and do some a base sort of mesh, a base sculpt on all of the individual parts, just sort of so that they're roughly there. And we've added in his feet and just kind of continuing to get all of the shapes and the proportions in that we need. And now we're going to move on to a likeness of Mikey. So I'll bring up a reference in a little while where he doesn't actually have a mask on. Yeah, here we go. And I'm just going to do my best from this image to kind of, you know, make it look at least a little like Mikey, because a lot of the defining features that show you that this is a different turtle is going to be around things like the weapons and like I said, the coloured bands and just the other accessories that he has to show that he's Mikey. But you know, we get pretty close with the likeness. I'm pleased with it. So yeah, we'll let this keep going again, and I'll jump back in when I come to do anything interesting again. so overall I'm pretty happy with that. He looks enough like Mikey at the moment, so we're going to move on to posing the body, and we just go for, I want it to feel like a figurine, because like I said, my ultimate goal in the end is to 3D print these things and you know, have them on my shelf or anything like that. So you know, we're going for a pose. I want a pose that makes him feel like a figurine. So yeah, we go for this standing pose. It's from a bunch of the movie posters and stuff like that, and it just looks cool. It's a cool pose. He looks pretty badass. So yeah, we'll let this keep going for now, because like I said, it's just a pose, and we'll jump back in when we start sculpting this guy up. Yeah, we're going to throw in some weapons. We're just going to, I don't think we do the chains or anything like that. We're just going to start throwing in some parts to identify, so that we can identify this character as Mikey. And yeah, so simple shapes for the nunchucks, and I think after that we're going to start moving on to the body sculpt. Anatomically speaking, because these are anthropomorphic kind of characters, they are supposed to look and have features of the animal that they are, but they also have the human side of them as well. Like anthropomorphic is like animal human hybrid type deals, you know, so animals that look like humans and have the bodies of humans. So yeah, we do kind of do a pretty basic anatomy pass on him. A lot of his body, his back and places like that are going to be covered anyway, so we don't go crazy with the anatomy. We do a pretty good job on the arms and the legs, but the rest of it we kind of just, you know, lean more into the turtle side of things. His body, his abs, for example, we follow the shell shape, so that when we extrude it, it's more in the shape of the shell. Yeah. So yeah, the basic anatomy over the whole thing, because a lot of it's going to be covered anyway. And yeah, this is base anatomy coming up now. This is what I was talking about with the shell. So that's not what your abs look like, but that's what his shell looks like. So, and we're going to extract off of the body, so it makes sense to just kind of put the rough shapes in there. So yeah, we'll let this keep going for a minute, and I'll jump in if anything comes up that I want to talk about. Yeah, so if you noticed, I went back and forth a little bit on the arms there, on the his left arm particularly there, while we were trying to work out the size. And as I was doing it, you know, I just felt like his arms needed to be bigger. Like looking at the reference and you know how jacked these turtles look like in the movies. Yeah, I just decided to make his arms a little bit more stacked. I pulled his chest in a tiny little bit as well. Because I know that I'm going to be putting a shell, like his front body plate is going to be there, which we're going to extract from, and I didn't want him to feel like his chest is sticking out too much, like that dodgy old Captain America drawing from the comics, you know. So yeah, I'll jump back in again if anything comes up, but just wanted to give you a quick explanation on the arms and what I was doing with them. At this point we merge the legs, and I don't go crazy on the anatomy around the knees or anywhere like that. A lot of this is going to be covered. I just want to make sure that we've got a decent base to start working off when we start, extracting his clothes and things like that. So yeah, we'll let this keep going because again, it's just a base anatomy pass. And yeah, I'll jump back in when we move on to some of his accessories, I think. Okay, so we're going to start extracting his shell, his like chest shell area. I did toy with doing the whole thing. I toyed with the idea of doing the whole thing in one hit, but I don't know. This way just felt like I could get some of those creases in there, really fill out some of the areas where it looks like the shell is supposed to represent muscle, and then merge it all together at the end, so that I've got like just clean lines, and I can work on each individual section of this. Without worrying about affecting anything underneath it, and I think it came out quite well. It worked. So yeah, again, we'll let this keep going because I'm just extracting armor plates basically and then sculpting them up. So yeah, it was a pretty straightforward process, and I'll jump back in a little while when anything else comes up. Okay, so we're going to sculpt the hands real quick, I think, before we merge them. The reason I sculpted it up is because he's basically holding the nunchucks, with both hands. So it's going to be the same sculpt on each side. So I sculpted this guy up, just like I would a normal hand, but with only 2 fingers. And then I just mirror it over and pose it onto the other arm before we do a merge of the whole thing. Yeah, but again, nothing out of the ordinary here, so yeah, I'll jump back in if anything comes up. But yeah, this is just a standard hand sculpt, but with just 2 fingers instead of 4. Okay, so mirrored over, we're going to do some extractions now for just some items that we're going to need. These are just, at this point, I'm just kind of trying to get all of the base meshes in, so it's one of those like, just make it exist first and then make it good later. So I'm just kind of going through and I start adding accessories to him, like his shorts here. I think this is actually scuba or surfing trousers that he's wearing, but they've been ripped on both sides, on one side, sorry. And yeah, I'm just going to keep adding some of his accessories and just, flicking back and forward between the sculpt and, things I notice. But knee pads next, and then we'll do straps and bandages and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm probably not going to talk an awful lot through this because, there's a ton of accessories that he's got. But I'll jump in if anything comes up that I think you guys might find interesting. So I might talk a little bit when I'm doing the necklaces and stuff like that. But again, this is just I'm sculpting up one bandage or one knee area. One knee pad, and then I'm going to flip it over and put it on his other knee. The bandages I do individually, again just to interject on myself before I shut up and let this play out. I did toy with the idea of doing them with the curve tool, but it just it didn't make sense. They were supposed to look raggedy anyway, so it didn't matter if they were clean extractions overly. So yeah, we did that with extractions off of the base mesh there. But yeah, I'll jump back in if anything comes up. But again, we've seen this type of modelling a few times from me now. So yeah, enjoy the sculpt. Okay, so we're doing a mask extractor now for his actual mask. Again, so with a lot of these things, particularly the cloth on these guys, the cloth looks like it's been ripped. It looks like it's been well used and worn. So for most of these extractions to do with his bandages and his mask and anything like that, I'm not too worried about how clean they look on the edges. So I've got a little thing I'm going to do later on to make them look a bit more frayed, which is using using a piece of mesh, a tiny piece of mesh that looks like a strand of really low poly material, and we're going to add that to the tube tool, or you know what I mean. So we're gonna use the tube tool to add to that, and we're gonna copy it and randomize it and make it look like ripped edges and things like that. So yeah, any of these areas where it's a bit rough, like I said, around the mask and things like that, I'm not too worried about. I just wanted to interject and let you know that was happening. Oh, sorry, it'd be the curve tool that we're using. So yeah, we'll add the mesh to the curve tool and just multiply it loads of times and then randomize it, and it should hopefully look like, well, I know it looks like ripped material. So like I said, I'm not too worried about how they look for now. So again, using the curve tool to create the beads that he wears around his left hand, his left arm. And yeah, I toy around with this for a little bit. We're going to do the same thing when we actually go to model the chains for the nunchucks, and when it comes to the necklaces and the beads that he's wearing around his neck. We're basically just using the tube tool, and not so much for these beads here because they're all uniform size and the same shape. But when it comes to his beads around his neck, they're randomized shell type things. I'm not really sure what they are, but yeah, when we actually add them to a curve, we'll randomize that a lot more and make it look a bit more organic. So here we go, just modeling one of the shapes, and then we add the curve tool with the closed loop option on, which you can see at the bottom there. And then once it's in, yeah, we start toying with the options in the bottom here, and we can just randomize it a little bit on certain rotations. We can randomize the scale a little bit as well, so they look slightly different. Particularly on this smaller one, I randomized the scale a bit more because the bigger necklace looked a bit more uniform, and the smaller necklace looked a bit more random. So yeah, we randomized the scale on that too. And yeah, I think after that we're going to model some glasses for his necklace there, to hang off his necklace, and then I think we've only got the shoes left to do once we've done the chains on the nunchucks. So I do have a go at sculpting out the shell, or at least the base of the shell, but I think I decide not to. I think it cuts off and I just go back to an older version where I hadn't done that. But we decide to do that later using the stamp tool, and then we'll mark out the edges with a mask. And then we'll sort of sink those areas in on the shell to make it look a bit more 3D. But yeah, for now we're just going to be using the curve tool to make the chains, and we're going to duplicate this over. And yeah, I'll jump back in when we actually get onto anything that's got a little bit more substance to it. So yeah, enjoy. Okay, so I've bought in the base trainer that I used on the Rebecca sculpt I did, just because, you know, the feeler trainers that Mikey's wearing are very similar in shape to the Reebok Classic. So I bring it in and I edit the base sculpt that I had of that shoe from here. But I'm pretty happy with how these trainers came out. Yeah, I mean, we'll let the sculpt play out. There's some decent detailing that goes into this. I think I don't add the actual like lettering or any of that sort of stuff until a bit later on. But you know, we get the base sculpt in and the trainers look pretty good. I'm very happy with how they came out. Considering they're supposed to be a bit tattered and ripped, I think they actually came out really, really nice. Okay, I'm really happy with how those trainers came out. So we're going to do a base sculpt on the jumper now. And again, just get this to a point where I'm comfortable adding detail to it and things like that. So again, this is nothing we haven't seen before, so I won't talk for too much through this. But what I will say is that there are occasions through this sculpt where I toyed with the UV mapping features that Nomad has. You know, it worked how it was supposed to work, but the truth is it's not. This isn't a model that I really needed to use it on. I thought I tried it to make it easier for if I wanted to project like a mask onto something and extract or add texture to it by you know, tiling and stamping in a tiled texture. But I move away from that in the end. I mean, like it's the features did what they were supposed to do. but they just weren't useful for me in this situation, and you know, it became a bit cumbersome. So there's a couple of moments where I go back and forward between doing a bit of UV unwrapping on this thing, but like I said, the truth is I don't really use the unwrapped UVs for anything. I end up using the stamp tool and the, you know, the clay tool to add detail to it anyway. So, you know, it worked out fine, I guess. But if you want to add actual images to anything, like I did it with stamp tools on the jumper, for example. But if you wanted to actually add an image to anything, you would definitely need to UV it. So I sculpted the sleeves as separate parts as well, just to interject. I just thought it would make it easier to, you know, to sculpt on these things. I'd be able to, you know, solo them out on without them getting in the way of each other, and actually get some texture all the way around, even underneath the pieces that are underneath each other. So yeah, I kept them as separate pieces. Okay, so we're just going to model and sculpt up the last few bits and bobs, like some buckles and some straps that go around his actual chest straps and things like that. He's got some smaller, like straps on there. I'm not really sure what they're for, but they look cool. And then I'm not really sure what we're going to move on to after that. Potentially doing some of the frayed material, but we'll have to see. Some last minute details going onto his surfer trousers, and then I'm not really sure what we move on to. I'm pretty sure we're going to start working on the frayed edges of the bandages and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll jump in and I'll explain a little bit more about that, but you know, it's very nearly there. I'm pretty pleased with this so far, even for just like a base sculpt, and when the aspect ratio changes, that means that we've moved over to Nomad on the PC, so we've got like a exponentially more polys to play around with. So yeah, we'll add all of the detail when we get over there. So this is where I actually have a go at sculpting the shell up a little bit. Wasn't really happy with it, and so decided to just leave it until we get over to the main PC. Like I said, we can add more detail and just have a bit more time. It felt a little bit like a cartoon, like 90s turtle cartoon shell, so I left that and came back to that later. Okay, so at this point I do toy around with the UV unwrapping tools just to see if it makes a difference on how I'm going to apply these textures. And to be quite honest, you know, like I said, the UV unwrapping tools did their job, but ultimately I think I'm just not as accustomed to these unwrapping tools as I am in something like Maya, and I don't feel like I had enough control over them, and it just became something that was taking up a lot of time, and I didn't want to have a large portion of this video be about, you know, UV unmapping, where you're just going to see the same sort of thing on the screen over and over and over again like that. And in the end I didn't really use it, so I kind of move away from it after a bit. I try it again on the trousers, I think, and then I move away from it and just start using the stamp tool and, like I said, the clay tool to, you know, to apply texture using the alphas. I have got a tutorial on my page about creating alphas and how to use them, so head on over and have a look if you want to see in a bit more detail how I do this type of stuff. So yeah, there we are, adding some lettering to the letters and things like that, you know, just to bring a bit more life to the trainers and a bit more realism. As you can see, the aspect ratio's changed, so we're now on the PC, and yeah, this means we can push it a little bit more and just get some real fine details in there. I think I got this up to over 10 million or 12 million points in the end, and you know, it really didn't struggle at all. So I think that, you know, most people will be good to go on, you know, most sort of like hobby sculptors that aren't really pushing detail into it will be good to go with the PC. There's not really a lot that's going to hold you back, especially if you've got a decent graphics card. Mine's only like a 3060 and it absolutely crushes Nomad, so yeah, I think everybody, you know, should be fine. It's a good bit of software, really well optimized. And like I said, with this what I'm doing now, adding the texture to it, I do have a tutorial on my page, so yeah, go check it out if you want to see how I do these things in a bit more detail. This is the part I was talking about where I'm adding like frayed edges. So I made one mesh, added it to a curve tool, sealed the edge so it was a closed loop, and then just played with the settings at the bottom there. You can crank up how many, you know, repetitions there are of the same mesh. I do come back and forward between these things because it started to load up the scene a bit much on things that you're not really going to see that much or see even that closely or even pay that much attention to. So I do come back and forward and I toy with the number on these things just to sort of like lower the poly count a little bit. But, you know, you're just randomizing the rotations, the scale and things like that to give it, you know, that sort of that random look that you get with a ripped piece of cloth. Here's where I try toying around with the UV mapping on the trousers again, because I wanted to use the repeat tool and the mask to kind of like cover the whole thing, and then do not an extraction, add some texture to it that way. But you know, it didn't work out like that in the end. I end up just using the stamp tool and randomly placing texture on it, and it actually felt okay. So yeah, again, we're just going to be adding some texture to these things using alphas and the stamp tool and stuff like that. So, you know, I'll jump back in if anything comes up or once we've moved off of this. I do take a moment in a minute where I sort of stop working on these sort of fluffy edges. It was driving me insane. There's a lot. He's got bandages on almost every single limb and around his head. So it became a lot. So I do take a break from this. I can't really remember what I move on to, but I do move off onto something else for a little while. So there we go, I'm just moving around the model, adding texture to it, like the leather straps at the back there, some sort of like pitting on the metal, just so that it looks a bit more old and worn. And I'm just moving around the model, adding some texture to it where I can, and you know, once you see the final renders, you'll see a lot of this texture and where it is, like there, for example. I was just adding some pitting to the metal so it looked like it had been old and worn out, you know. But yeah, I'm just moving around the model looking for things I can do so that I'm not constantly you know, doing just this sort of like frayed edge around all of this material, because it became really annoying. Like, it just took long and it was so cumbersome. So yeah, just looking around for things on the model to add texture to that aren't actually bandages or frayed material. So yeah, we'll jump back in a little bit when I move off of this and we maybe start painting, or if I jump onto the shell, or just if anything else interesting comes up, like what we're doing here with the chest plate. You know, I'm just adding texture to it in random places, random rotations on it, just so that it doesn't feel samey. And I'm basically doing this across the whole model, you know. So yeah, we'll let this play out and I'll jump back in if anything interesting comes up. And back to the bandages for a little while. Okay, so the reason I'm redoing these is because I actually validated these and realised that the mesh on these little tubes was way too high for what I needed. So yeah, I deleted them and remade them just with a lower poly count, because I don't need to do anything with these other than colour them. So yeah, they were taking up a lot of like memory, and a lot of mesh was being used on those. So yeah, that's the reason I went back in and redid those. Okay, and we're going to start now adding some of the scales and just some of that scaly skin texture to his body. Again, this is something I did a tutorial on my channel. I did do a few tutorials based around this sculpt, knowing I was going to be adding a bit more detail to it. So yeah, like I said, there's a tutorial on my channel about how I did this, and it's really honestly just using alphas to drag out, you know, different textures and things like that onto the body. You can find them online, you can make your own, there's a bunch of stuff you can do, and it's just a really fast way of adding actual texture and you know, and a feel of realness to the character. So yeah, we go over the whole body using this, like different skin textures and scale textures, and that's about it really. So yeah, I'll jump back in a little bit when anything interesting comes up. So here we go with the shell. So again, I tried some different stuff, ended up just dragging it out using the stamp tool. Once I had some texture on there, I marked out the deeper recesses with the mask tool, and then just, you know, using the widget tool, I scaled them in a little. I do add another sort of like texture stamp on top of this, because it's started to feel a bit smoothed out, and then I go around the edge using the same texture that I used on his chest, and individually place it on all of the edging of his shell where it just looks a bit smooth, where the texture the stamp couldn't quite wrap around the shell. So yeah, I was pretty happy with how this came out. You know, I don't think we're too far away from being done on this now, so we'll move on to the painting soon, I believe. Oh, bandages again. Again, I put these off. Every time I did one limb, I put it off and just waited until I had no other option but to move on to the bandages again. So we'll let this play out for a minute again. You know, we've seen this a few times now. adding a bit of metal pitting again to the ends of the nunchucks. I think we're going to move off of this soon and start with the painting, but yeah, I think there's just, you know, a few bits, but I'm going to go around the model looking for anything that I've missed. Yeah, here we go. I've got to add texture to his hands and to his knuckles and stuff like that. I really don't think we're too far away from painting this thing, so yeah, we'll let this keep going, and I'll come and talk some more about it when we get to the painting. There. I think the last thing to do is the jumper for actual texture on the model, and then yeah, once this is done, I think we're going to move on to painting. I do think I have one more attempt at UV unwrapping this thing, but I can't really remember. I think I did, but I think I cut it out. Maybe we'll see if it comes up, but again, it's just another attempt at UV unwrapping, and I think it's just more the fact that I think it's a skill issue. I mean, I think I'm probably not using it correctly. Or I am, and I'm just, you know, attempting to do the wrong thing with it now that it's been UV'd. So, yeah, just again, final parts of the model that we're going to go over and just add the final details to. And I'll probably just jump in when we get to the painting, because, you know, even with this mask, we're just going to be doing a lot of the same things that you've already seen, such as, you know, sculpting in the wrinkles, adding the frayed edges, and I don't think there's an awful lot left. So, yeah, I think at this point I'll leave it, and I'll jump back in when the painting starts. So here we go. I actually in this video I actually did a tutorial on making the eyeballs. So I've got new eyes that I made for Mikey in this video. Something else I did in this one just to make my life easier was actually put a color palette, and just every time I used a new color or a different shade of green, I just quickly added it to the color palette because yeah, you know, like picking individual colours off of this guy once you'd add blend layers to it, once you've added blend layers to it and you've like, you know, adjusted the opacity of each colour, it became a pain, or it becomes a pain to actually go back and grab that colour. So, you know, to me it made sense to just put a quick colour palette on just a random little plane next to the model, so it could just keep selecting colours off that. But yeah, overall I'm happy with how this paint job comes out. You know, I wanted to make it varied. I wanted the lighter patches to feel like where there's softer skin, the darker patches to feel where it's tougher skin, particularly around the shoulders where he's got larger scales and stuff like that. And then basically after I'm happy with the skin tones, the majority of it is going to be adding base colour and then just adding a huge all over pass on like dirt and grime and wear and just stuff like that, you know. So again, it's not a thing, nothing we haven't seen 100 times on other videos, but if anything comes up that I feel like's interesting, I will come back in and talk about it. I'll probably talk more when we get to the shell and when he paints the shell, but you know, once the base colours are on, a lot of it's going to be a huge pass on the dirt. The skin texture was one of the things, in my opinion, that really sells this thing as a more realistic model. The rest of it's, you know, pretty basic stuff. We're like I said, with a dirt pass on the whole thing, and the shell I'm pretty pleased with how I did that. So when you're painting inside of Nomad, I try and treat it like I'm painting in any other program. You know, I use the layers and the blending options, and I smudge a lot to kind of, you know, help blend things in, and then the opacity changes helps to blend things in. But, you know, a lot of this I'm going in and doing, I say a lot, I'm doing some of this manually in terms of adding sort of like depth to it. So there, for example, the muscles around his rib cage and stuff like that, I add a lot of that depth to it manually. And just I thought it looked really cool. So, you know, again, nothing unusual is happening here. We're just doing a better job of what we already have done in several other videos. We're adding the tattoo. I did this in a tutorial that I put on my channel as well. I showed you how I will do this. What I want to quickly say before we move on and start painting the rest of him is that I realise his colours look a little bit more muted and a bit more like they've got a bit more orange or yellow over the top to the lighting, but it felt a bit flat when I painted it onto the actual model. So I sort of like I brightened him up a little bit. I saturated him a little bit more in a lot of areas just to give him a bit more, I don't know, a bit more pop. But yeah, in the reference I've got for this pose, I think that there's a lighting, a sunset light set up. So it's in the evening. The poster was sort of like set in the evening, and there's like a, you know, that orangey hue to the scene. So, you know, like I said, I just saturated him a little bit more, took some of that orangey hue-ish light out, and sort of tried to make him feel a bit more vibrant while I was painting him. But you know, I think, again, at this point, yeah, here we go. So a lot of this from now on is going to be about adding a grunge pass to the whole thing to just make it feel a bit more worn and like, you know, anything that he's doing, he's done in the real world. So I even go over his body again at some point and put a little grunge pass over him, like he's been out fighting or something. But, you know, that's basically where we are with this. So I'll jump back in if anything comes up while we're painting. But like I said, a lot of this is just a grunge pass. So with the shell, I ended up putting a base color on, and then using the same alpha that I used to stamp the texture into it, I actually set that to a darker color and put some color into the recesses using that same alpha. And then I went over the whole thing with a nice dark grunge pass. And the shell actually came out really, really nicely. I made sure to make it not like, I didn't want it to look wet, but I wanted it to have some type of reflectance, or not reflectance, a little bit of like shine to it, so that you could really see the details in it when it spins around. I don't think his shell would be quite that shiny, but it looked really nice in the light, so I just left it as it was. And again, we're going to go through the whole thing, just finishing up with a grunge pass. I think the only other thing that we do where we actually, put some texture onto this thing and manually paint some wooden textures is on the actual handles. I struggled to find a material or a alpha of any sort that would look good for, like a wood grain sort of texture. So, I ended up just using the scratch texture that was in here, dragging it out really, really long and shallow, and then just rubbing away at some of the stuff so that it wasn't over the top. And you'll see when we get to it, but I feel like it looks like a nice, smoothed off, milled, or turned wooden handle, So yeah, we'll take a look at it when we get to it, and you see what you think. But again, a lot of what's left is grunge pass and adding a bit of detail to the jumper, but it's the same thing. I'm just using an alpha and stamping on a shape and then colouring it in manually. So far it's looking pretty darn good. I'm more than happy with this so far. I'm actually super impressed with myself for what I've done on this model. It looks really, really good, and it's probably one of the best ones I've done so far. So yeah, we'll let this play out for now, and you can just see some of the final details that I'm adding, because I don't really think we're too far off being done on this now. One of the only things I would say when you're adding a grunge pass to anything like this is remember that if you're going to smooth any of the painting that you've done, to set the paint to 0, because there was a point in this which I think I cut out where I had to go back and redo it again because I'd forgotten to turn the intensity of the smooth to 0, and I ended up smoothing out a lot of detail on one side of his body. Like all of that nice skin texture I added there, I ended up smoothing it off, trying to blur the paint a little bit. So just be mindful of that and make sure that you've set the intensity on the smooth brush to 0 if you want to smooth any of the paint layers. Okay, so yeah, I quickly grabbed some a Mikey sort of like graffiti tag. I tried to find one that matched with what he had on the movie poster there, but the only one I could find was on a toy, and the image quality was really low, so I had to spend a bit of time cleaning that up inside of Krita, but we ended up with this and it looks pretty good. So yeah, I've got a tag on all of his handles, and then we add the wood grain texture. There we go. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with how these came out. We do have to add some metal to the top. There we go. And maybe a little bit of a grunge pass on all of this. But I wanted to... No, we didn't do that because I wanted to keep his nunchucks looking clean. They're like... I imagine the Ninja Turtles as being like ninjas and warriors, that they would want to keep their weapons clean. I'm sure they look after their weapons better than they look after themselves. So I wanted his weapons to actually look clean and like, looked after. So they're not very dirty weapons, but everything else, huge grunge pass on it, and it actually worked out really, really nicely. glass detail on the jumper to make it feel a bit vintage, was to put some cracks through the texture. And I think we're very nearly there. Yeah, we're going to make a base now. And I think that we're done after that. Yeah, so again, because I want to make these into actual 3D printed sculptures eventually, I've gone from a few videos back, I've started building like at the very least a base with their name on it. And that's what we ended up doing with Mikey here. So we're going to quickly using the same tools that we've used throughout this thing. You know, the stamp tool, the alphas and stuff like that. Yeah, we're going to quickly add his name and a logo to it and paint this up, and then I believe we're done. I think we're going to just chuck some lights at it, and then I think we're done. So I'll jump back in with some, you know, some just, I guess, closing thoughts once we've done the lighting. The lighting will actually just be a standard 3-point light setup. You know, a main light to show you the detail at the front. A sort of like fill light to just throw some light into the shadows so it doesn't look so dark on one side, and then a rim light to sort of like set him off the background so there's that nice bright light reflecting off of the edges of the sculpture there. So yeah, we'll go through all that now, and then I believe we're actually done. So yeah, there we go, just setting it off so that we got a nice edge light so that it pops him off the background. Guys, I'm super happy with how this one came out. I'm very impressed with myself. I'm very impressed with what you can actually do inside of Nomad. This is no other programs involved, just Nomad Sculpt. So super impressed with what you're able to do in here. And super impressed with myself for what I've made. So yeah, thank you all very much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. If there's any models or characters that you'd like to see me sculpt in the future, then, you know, interact with the video, drop a comment and let me know what you'd like to see. The next one I'm doing at the moment, I'm currently started working on the tablet with, is Chun-Li. I'm going to do a sculpt of Chun-Li. And yeah, other than that, I guess that's it, guys. So like and subscribe, you know, set the notification bell off so that you can be reminded when anything comes up, a new video comes out. And, you know, share it if you think this will be useful to anybody. So yeah, I appreciate everyone for being here. You know, and thanks for the support so far. Happy sculpting, everybody, and I'll catch you in the next one.